The British Grand Prix is going to be one of those races that is remembered for all the wrong reasons. We had a very controversial crash on the first lap with a very controversial outcome in terms of the penalty. And at one point, it even looked like a Ferrari was going to win this race. Welcome back to another race review. We got a lot of points to cover here. We're going to summarize them very quickly, and we're going to get into the first topic of this video, which is, of course, what you came here to see our reactions of, the crash on that opening lap.
I don't want to say you saw something like this coming, but it really seemed like the both of them were not willing to let off today, and it resulted in a massive crash.
Max loses out more here. His car goes off into the barrier. His race is completely over, and that was the most disappointing factor because the wheel-to-wheel battles at that point, even though it was just for half a lap, they were stellar.
And right away, the debate started over whether there would be a penalty or whether it was a racing incident. Ultimately, there was time to think it through because this did result in a red flag. Hamilton and the rest of the field were able to come back to the pits, and this was quite fortunate for Mercedes because they were able to fix the minor damage that Hamilton got in that incident. The situation is quite tricky because I do understand both sides of the argument. On one hand, Lewis did not have the advantage going into the corner. Both drivers took completely different lines. It's difficult to say. I think with the way that these two have been racing each other, a collision was bound to happen at some point. There's quite a few people saying that this is a racing incident and there shouldn't have been a penalty. I disagree. I think the penalty was justified, and this is because of the different types of penalties that we've seen handed out over the course of other races this season. I mean, you've had other drivers knock people out of the race or down the order, and they have also been handed penalties. So I know this is a lap one type of thing, but I don't think that you should be able to excuse one when the others have been penalized for virtually the same type of move.
I could see both sides in this scenario. You had Max committing to the line, and you could see just from his steering wheel, he did adjust just because he saw Hamilton there. He, I guess, thought Hamilton would pull back and just let him by. And you even have Christian Horner saying, like, this is not a turn where people get past. Usually it's not safe, but that later on gets disproven because then later on in this race, you see Hamilton get past Norris and Leclerc at the exact same spot. It felt a little weird to only be given 10 seconds. I personally think at least that 10-second penalty had to be done within like 3 laps from the race restart, just so that it actually takes a bigger toll rather than Hamilton being able to make up a huge gap, take his 10 seconds, and then only fall back like 3 places.
I kind of agree with the sentiment that not just in this particular case, but in any type of similar scenario going forward, if you're giving a driver a time penalty that has to be taken in the pit box, you might as well force them to take it within a certain time frame. Otherwise, it just doesn't really make sense that they can sort of build an advantage around it, especially if they have a dominant car.
It also then becomes the question, hard racing versus smart racing.
That's the thing too. You don't want these type of things to impact the way that drivers race each other. We want to see these type of hard battles. Ultimately though, we are not stewards. We don't make these type of decisions. Hamilton took the penalty on the chin and still delivered a fantastic drive from there. But this also does lead into the fact that Charles had some engine issues, and that was quite difficult for him. What are your thoughts on how that all played out?
I mean, it was amazing to see Charles actually hold off the Mercedes. I was ready at this second race restart to just see Hamilton take off, have a nice easy drive, make up a substantial lead regardless of his time penalty, but no. You had Charles hold him off. There was something with that Ferrari medium tire compound that just worked for them. And then it gets very emotional because next thing you know, Charles is coming on the radio saying, my engine is completely gone. You see the gap dwindling down. You think this is the end of his race almost. Not only did this problem happen once, it happened twice. So we were on this roller coaster of emotion on if Charles's car was going to hold up against the Mercedes.
And the last thing we want to mention for this first half is that a lot of drivers had their race outcomes defined by these horribly slow pit stops. In the first half, you had both Lando and Alonso getting really stuck with one tire that just did not want to secure itself. Lots of people speculating that the heat played a factor, but it kind of sucked to see that they probably could have had stronger performances today if they weren't held up for so long.
So it's safe to say this was a dramatic first half of the race. So when combining all these elements together, Cass, how'd you score it?
I'll keep this short and sweet. I put my excitement at a 5 because we went through a lot of highs and lows. Most of my excitement came from the fact that we had a different team in the lead. I was really hopeful for Charles. As for the racing, I put it down at a 3 just because it felt pretty disappointing, honestly. We had a very hard-fought battle essentially taken away from us after half a lap. I would have loved to have seen what these two would have done throughout the course of an entire race. And then other than that, everything was just about maintaining lead, overtakes because of slow pit stops. I didn't see that much wheel-to-wheel battle on screen. Who knows? Maybe there was some more, but we just didn't see it. And then of course, drama up at a 10. I think that pretty much speaks for itself. So that brings my first half score at a 6.
For me, I scored my excitement at a 6. I was excited to see that the Ferrari was able to hold off the Mercedes, so it made me start to think that there is a chance that Charles could win this race. I scored my racing a 4. Most of those points came from that first lap though, because the wheel-to-wheel battles between those two were superb. Otherwise, you just had Checo making up grounds, which we didn't even get to see. A lot of instances here in the first half were just people getting caught up in DRS trains. In terms of the drama, I scored it an 8 for the fiascos in the pit stops, to Vettel spinning out, to, of course, the big crash in the first half, leaving everyone unsure of what was to come, scoring my first half a 6 as well.
This brings us into the second half, which is immediately kick-started with Lewis taking his 10-second time penalty. He re-emerges on track back in 5th, and from here things are really starting to look good for Mercedes.
And so now our attention turns to Ferrari, who are the next people to bring in their drivers for their mandatory pit stops. They're looking really good on these medium tires, but Sainz is the first one to come in.
Another very slow pit stop. I think it was somewhere around 12.3 seconds. Another wheel gun getting stuck and unable to secure that tire. And then we switch over to Charles, who's coming in the next lap, and I was honestly holding my breath, praying that they wouldn't mess up like they just did with his teammate.
And fortunately for him, it was a clean pit stop. He ends up emerging back onto the track with about a 7-second lead. But now Hamilton is on hammer time, and he's chasing after that victory. Inevitably, towards the end of the second half with only 2 laps to go, Hamilton does get by Charles. Charles ends up going wide, and I almost thought he completely lost it, which don't even get me started if that happened. I would have felt so bad for Charles. Thankfully, he holds on to second place, and Lewis gets the victory.
Meanwhile, while all of this is going on, they bring Perez into the pits to steal away that fastest lap. I guess just trying to scoop up any salvageable moment from this weekend because Red Bull did not have a great day today.
So when it came time to scoring this second half, for me, I scored my excitement at a 4. I was still unsure if Charles was going to be able to hold off the lead. However, when looking at the pace that Hamilton was driving at, it was kind of obvious he was going to catch up to him and take the lead. But hey, you had a hometown driver win the race, which is always great to see, especially with a full crowd at Silverstone. In terms of the racing though, I scored it a 5. We still had to see Hamilton make his way back up the grid. You had some movements happening down in the back markers as well. And in terms of the drama, not too much was happening there. I scored it a 4. You did have Vettel retire and a spin from Kimi. That's sort of where those points came from. And this scores my second half at a 4.3. I'm gonna round that down though to a 4.25.
As for myself, I scored my excitement at a 6 just because I think I was a little more hopeful and optimistic that Charles would be able to hang on to that win. As for racing though, I did score it at a 4. Once again, I feel like there wasn't all that much going on out there. You did have Charles and Daniel doing a lot of defending. Other than that, you also saw some spins, you saw some unbelievably easy overtakes. It just was kind of subpar for me. But then for drama, I had this at a 7 because of Lewis hunting down Charles. You also had poor Seb DNFing. You had Pierre with a puncture at the last minute. You had the dwindling gap between the Ferrari and the McLaren of Daniel Ricciardo. That had me super stressed. And then you had Kimi spinning and wondering if Perez would potentially get a penalty for it. This puts my overall score at a 5.6. I'm gonna drop that down to a 5.5.
So when you combine both of our scores together, the British Grand Prix of 2021 comes out to a 5.5. Here's how this race compares to the other races so far this season. You'll have to let us know, of course, down in the comments, what are your thoughts on the racing incident that took place on the first lap?
Was the penalty justified? Should it have been passed off as a racing incident? You'll have to let us know. We invite you to sound off in the comments, but of course, please be respectful and kind. We do not tolerate any hate whatsoever on this channel. If you are being rude towards other people, we will be deleting your comment. End of discussion.
We'll be checking out those comments, and while you're down there, don't forget to leave this video a like, hit that subscribe button if you haven't done so already.
As per usual, make sure to follow us on social media at CCF1 channel to keep the conversation going.
And we will catch you in the next video.
Bye!